Okay, Bes Hashem Yisbarach, we're starting Masechta Círoבין. So we know it's a complex Masechta. Hopefully we'll try to bring some clarity over here to understand. We'll start off with the Akdama. And that is that the Torah asers the Lamites Malachas on Shabbos, as we mentioned in Perek Zayin Masechta Shabbos. The last Malacha mentioned on the list is Haitzah, which means taking out, which entails moving an item from a Rishus Harabim to Rishus Yochid, or Rishus Yochid to Rishus Harabim, or Daled Amos in Rishus Harabim. This malacha is referred to as carrying, but includes all ways of moving objects, such as pushing, pulling, or throwing, as explained by Arichos throughout Masechta Shabbos. What's interesting is, as we mentioned in Masechta Shabbos, is that the Lamites Malachos, the list, ends off with Haitzah, and the Masechta actually starts off with Haitzah. So what's important for Masechta Círoבין, obviously, is we're going to discuss the Daled Rishuyos, the four domains, which is Rishus HaYochid, Rishus HaRabim, Karmelis, and Amakim P'tor, and what they are. So the Rishus HaYochid is a private domain. Rishus HaRabim is a public domain. The Karmelis is a middle ground. It's somewhere between a public and private Rishus, and Amakim P'tor is exactly that, an exempt area. So what is a Rishus HaYochid? Rishus HaYochid is a private domain, which is an area enclosed by mechitas at least 10 tvachim high. This area must be at least 4 tvachim wide and 4 tvachim long. According to most shittas, it needs to be enclosed only on 3 sides in order to qualify as Rishus HaYochid min HaTorah. However, the Rambam in Hilchos Shabbos Perek Zayin Halacha Tes holds that an area enclosed on only 3 sides is a Karmelis, and in order to be classified as Rishus HaYochid, the area must be enclosed on the 4th side. The 4th wall doesn't need to be complete. Even a pole, a lechi, is enough. Even according to the other shittas, there may be a difference between a 3-walled area open to a Karmelis and a 3-walled area open to a Rishus HaRabim, as will be discussed in Perek Tes. Although the Rishus HaYochid literally means a private Rishus, the private ownership is not necessary. The idea behind this name is that the area is enclosed and not designated for public use. A Rishus HaRabim is a commonly used street or another public area. It must be at least 16 amos wide and open at both ends. According to some Rishonim, it must be used by at least 600,000 people, Shishim Riboy, the counted population of the Yidden when they were encamping in the Midbar, when they were traveling, to qualify as a Rishus HaRabim. And for more information on this, you should look in the Bir Halacha, in Siman Shin Mem Hey, where he goes through this. Now, there are those that hold, Taisus, and the Rambam have different shittas over here, that you could have just one, just 16 amos wide, or just Shishim Riboy. Obviously, we're all familiar with the Shishim Riboy concept because of Ramosha's Chiddush and Igros Moshe about having an Erev Flatbush. Borough Park is that Osha Parkway has Shishim Riboy, people traveling because they're in cars. It's a lot of Chiddushim involved over there, but without getting involved in that yet. And then you have a Karmelis. A Karmelis is the area named for its intermediate status. It's not a Rishus HaRabim, it's not a Rishus HaYochid. The word Karmel means fresh grain, which refers to grain that still has its natural moistness, but it's dry enough to be cut. So it's intermediate state. Taisus brings that it's Miloshen Rach Umal, which is the same idea really. This is what Taisus means. That's Rach Umal. Carmel is the word Rach Umal. So that's Karmelis, that's the idea. So Karmelis is an area that's not a Rishus HaRabim because it lacks one of the necessary conditions. It's not set aside for public use, or it has less than 16 amos wide, and it's neither a Rishus HaYochid because it doesn't have the required mechitzas. An example of a Karmelis are an open field, an empty lot, or an elevated area such as a pillar or a tree stump in a public domain that rises between 3 and 10 tvachim above the ground. The area must also be at least 4 tvachim wide and 4 tvachim long to qualify as a Karmelis. If it's smaller, it's going to be a Amakim P'tor, which is the last Rishus that we're talking about over here. A Amakim P'tor is also an area that's not a Rishus HaRabim or Rishus HaYochid, but it's smaller than a Karmelis, meaning that it's less than 4 tvachim long or wide. Another case of a Amakim P'tor is the airspace that's above the Rishus HaRabim or a Karmelis. A Rishus HaRabim or a Karmelis extend only 10 tvachim upward. The airspace above is a Amakim P'tor. Mid'oraisa, the Isser against transferring items on Shabbos applies only to transfers between Rishus HaYochid and Rishus HaRabim, and moving items Daled Amos Rishus HaRabim. Because the Karmelis resembles both Rishus HaYochid and Rishus HaRabim, The Chachamim were geyser that it has to be treated with the chumras of Rishus Yochid and the chumras of Rishus Rabbim. Therefore, as is the case with Rishus Rabbim, one may not carry an object for Amos and a Carmelis to carry between it and a private domain, a Rishus Yochid. And as is the case with a Rishus Yochid, one may not carry between a Carmelis and a Rishus Rabbim either. Carrying from any Rishus into a Makam Tur is usually mutter, even with Rabbanon, not a problem at all. Okay. Part 2 of the Hakdama to Masechet Círovín is something that we have to understand over here, something called mechitzas. The mechitzas, or partitions that surround Rosh Hashanah, must be at least 10 tvachim high. They may be regular walls rising from the ground level to a height of 10 tvachim. They may be the walls of a hole in the ground that's 10 tvachim deep. Or they may be the steep slopes that surround a mound that's 10 tvachim high. Any combination of these can also form a Rosh Hashanah. For example, you have a hole that's 5 tvachim deep, and it's surrounded by a wall that's 5 tvachim high, that will be a Rosh Hashanah, even if it's made up of two different things. A mechitza can be valid even if it's not entirely solid, but it has holes in it. It has gaps in it. Obviously, every enclosed area must have at least one opening so people can go in and out of it. Since this is a necessary feature of every enclosed area, it follows that a mechitza is not necessarily disqualified because it has gaps. There's a difference in this between a gap, a pesach, and one that's a pirza. An entrance does not disqualify a mechitza, but a pirza does. Furthermore, not only does an entrance not disqualify a mechitza, but it itself is considered part of the mechitza. That is, the walls on either side are considered to extend across the opening and close it. Meaning that even if you have a door that opens, so let's say you have a door that's 4 feet wide, and it's 2 amas, and you open it up, those 2 amas are still part of the mechitza. It's not mevatel to mechitza. Therefore, even the area directly opposite the opening is also considered closed. So let's talk about 3 ideas that regarding openings in a mechitza. So if you have a pirza yisera me'asar amas, which is a gap that's wider than 10 amas, so to qualify as an entrance, a gap may not be wider than 10 amas. Any gap greater than 10 amas is a breach that invalidates that partition, which would passel this from being a mechitza. Or you have, some would be familiar with this concept from Masechet Sukkah, paras meruba ala oimed, the gap that's bigger than the walled portions. Even if every gap in a partition is narrower than 10 amas, but the total width of all the gaps is more than the total width of the solid parts, the mechitza will be no good. An important exception to this halacha is where all the 4 corners of the enclosed area are clearly outlined by double posts, like L-shaped posts that extend from an amma on both sides of the corner, which would be shem daled mechitzas, as will be discussed in Parak Beis. The area outlined in this way is Rosh Hashanah, at least according to the Torah, Midaraisa, even though it's mostly open. However, the Rabbanon allowed carrying in such Rosh Hashanah only in certain circumstances. Again, as will be discussed in Parak Beis. The next thing is, you have a tzuras ha-pesach. A tzuras ha-pesach is a form of a doorway. That's what it literally means. It's a structure that resembles a doorway. It consists of 2 vertical posts and a horizontal bar, or a string that extends from the top of one post to the top of the other, so forming the shape of a doorway, which has 2 doorposts and a lintel. The bar or the string on top must be set on top of the post. If it's attached to the sides, it is not a good tzuras ha-pesach. Because it looks like a doorway, it's more effective than the entrances discussed to this point. It's not considered a breach in the wall, even if it's wider than 10 amas. According to most shittas, even mechitzas made only of these structures are valid, meaning all you need is a lechi, and a small thin piece of wood, and a string on top, as the Erev in your driveway might look like. The tzuras ha-pesach is widely used nowadays to enclose a carmelis, where carrying is asam d'Rabbanan, and therefore converting it into a Rosh Hashanah where carrying would be permitted, which is what we commonly call an Erev, right? Obviously, there's that type of Erev. There's Erev Chaseres, and there's Erev Tafshilin, and there's Erev Tchumen. So we're going to be discussing Erev Chaseres, Shtufim Avoyes, and Erev Tchumen. Not so much Erev Tafshilin, that would be left from Masechet Beya. So, Midrabanan, we know in Torah Shabbal Peh, there's halacha l'meisha misinai. Now, many of the halachas discussed over here, the Gemara says in Sukkah and in Círovín, that shiurim chatzitzin and mechitzin halacha l'meisha misinai. The halacha of the shiurim of whatever it may be, the shiur of things, the kezayas, the kibeya, it's halacha l'meisha misinai, right? The Rush says, interestingly enough, that the shir for bar mitzvah, when somebody becomes a gadol, it's also learned that halacha l'moshe misinai. It's also part of shiurim. Shiurim chatzitzin, somebody's taivel and has a chatzitza. What exactly is considered a chatzitza? That's halacha l'moshe misinai. Mechitzin, what's considered a mechitza, what not? This is also halacha l'moshe misinai. So halacha l'moshe misinai taught us that a gap, even if it's not an entrance, does not disqualify a partition if it meets one of the following conditions. We have lavud, we have good, which would be good asik and good achis, and then we have pitik or yered v'saisim. What are these ideas? So lavud, it means it's joined together. So lavud teaches us that any gap narrower than 3 tvachim is not considered a gap at all. Rather, we view it as solid all the way down, all the way across. So a partition may consist only of narrow sticks planted in the ground some distance from each other, provided that the gaps between the sticks that are standing next to each other are less than 3 tvachim apart. Even though the partition is almost entirely open, it's a good mechitza because each gap is considered as though it's closed because of lavud. However, as we'll see at the end of Parak Aleph, that there will be some chachamim that want to limit the use of using these types of mechitzas. Now, we have good. Good means an extension. So, what kind of extension are we talking about over here? So we have good asik and good achis. So this kula allows us to extend mechitzas into higher or lower areas that do not physically reach. So first we'll talk about good asik, to extend and raise the mechitza. A partition 10 tvachim high is viewed as extending upward, forming a mechitza for the area above. Thus, the space above a rishus hayachid is also rishus hayachid because the mechitzas extend upward and enclose it. Now, the halacha is, the metzias is like this: if you have a rishus hayachid, 300 feet above the rishus hayachid, the ear space above that is also rishus hayachid. I don't know how you can get there exactly, but that's rishus hayachid because it's good asik. Now, if you have, let's say, a tent, like they have these big tents by shuls, let's say, that have a big, has a big covering, so that would be good achis. Extend and lower the mechitza. A partition 10 tvachim high that's raised from the ground, the fence around the balcony, for example, can be viewed as extending downward, so converting the open ear below into a rishus hayachid. The rule of good achis does not apply where the physical partition is high enough above the ground that small goats can easily pass through. We have gidi and boikenboy. This is defined as a gap of 3 tvachim or more, right? However, if the mechitza is suspended more than 3 tvachim over a body of water where animals cannot pass, it is good because the passage of fish under the mechitza does not matter, as explained in the Gemara on Daf Kuf Aleph Amud Beis. Now the third halacha over here is pitik yered v'saisim. The edge of a roof extends downward and seals. As the words imply, the edge of a roof is considered to extend downward to the ground to form a mechitza. It renders the area beneath the roof a rishus hayachid. A sloped roof would not be included in this kula. The downward extension of the roof is not possible by the passage of animals. It's a different halacha. According to many rishonim, a roof in this context is defined as an overhead board that measures at least 4 by 4 tvachim. Okay, now let's discuss a third area, a rishus hayachid that's asur midrabanan, meaning different types of rishuyos, which will also get into Ruvei Chatzeres and Shutufim Avoyos. Okay, most of the Masechta deals with the halachas of areas that are rishus hayachid in a Torah, where the Chacham applies certain isurim against carrying. So you have a mavoy, or something that's nifratz b'miluay l'mokum ha'isur, and a karfef. So to understand what a mavoy is, to understand much of this Masechta, it's necessary to be familiar with the layout of streets and the houses in the times of the Mishnayos. In those times, even up to modern times in many places, several houses open up into a courtyard, and several courtyards would in turn lead into an alley through which the people would pass through to get to the street. Such an alley is known as a mavoy, or the lashon rabbim is mavoyos. Typically, the mavoy was a dead-end alley, closed on all 3 sides, and open only on the 4th side where it met the rishus rabbim. This is known as a mavoy sasum. An alley that's open, that has a street on both sides, is called a mavoy mefulish, which you can go through pass through from one street to another. Min HaTorah, the closed alleys or rishus hayachid, one is mutter to carry in it. The Chacham were concerned though that people might view the alley as a rishus rabbim since it's used as a street and it's completely open on one side. Therefore, if carrying was mutter in the alley, people might come to carry in a real Rishus Harabim as well. Some Rishonim give a different shot. Since the alley is completely open to the Rishus Harabim, people might mistakenly conclude that it's part of the Rishus Harabim and carry between it and the street, which would then be carrying from a Rishus Harabim to Rishus Yachon and vice versa. So they may lead people to carry in Rishus Harabim or to do Haitzav and Rishus and Shabbos. So in order to prevent this, the Chachamim asked carrying in the alley unless an adjustment is made to the open end. However, it's not necessary to erect a full mechitza or any other halachic equivalent described above to close the opening. Rather, you can place a kaira, which is a crossbeam, across the top of the opening to stand a lechi, which is a pole next to one of the walls at the opening. That's okay, and that's going to be matter you, because then you have this recognition that the rishus stops here. This is the lechi. This is rishus. This is the mavoi. This is rishus rabbah. You're not going to be confused anymore. Now you have something called the nifratz b'milui l'makam ha'aser, breached in its entirety to a makam aser. If an area in which carrying is mutter is completely open to an area in which carrying is aser, carrying becomes aser in the makam ha'mutter as well. This is a gzer midrabban. So completely open means, what does it mean nifratz b'milui? That there's no mechitza at all along the side that joins the two areas. For example, you have a courtyard that's open on one side to a carmelis, it becomes forbidden to carry in the chutzner as well. Even if parts of a mechitza continue to separate the two areas, but the opening between the parts is more than 10 amas, so it's considered a pirza rather than a pesach. So the two areas are considered paras b'milui, completely open to each other, and the area which is also to carry in also asers carrying in the makam hamutter. If, however, the opening between them can be considered a pesach, the two areas are halachically separated, and carrying therefore remains mutter in the makam hamutter. There are even cases in which carrying becomes asur as a result of two mekaymes hamutarim being completely open to each other. This happens when carrying is for some reason asur between the two areas that are mutter and are completely open to each other. In such a case, carrying becomes asur even within each area, meaning that if you have, let's say, for whatever reason, you have two rishus hayachas that you can't carry from one to the other, so it becomes that you wouldn't be able to, meaning even if this is a makam hamutter and that's a makam hamutter, but if they're going to be open to each, but for whatever reason it's going to be asur, so we're going to have a problem with that, as discussed in Parak Tes Mishnah Beis. Let's just take a quick look at that and see what that case might be. So you have a gag gadol samach lekatan, hagadol mutter v'katan asur. Chatzi gedel shenifet zel ketana, gedel mutter zel ketana asur, neishi kipischa shel gadol. Right, but it's machlekes tanoim over here. It's mutter asur, so we'll see. Mitzvah Hashem, we'll get there. The next thing is a karfef. A karfef is an area that's enclosed, but not for residential purposes. Some areas are given carmelis status, even though they're enclosed within mechitzas that make them rishus yochid. If an area is larger than 5,000 square amas, has a mechitza around it for purposes not related to daily living, the Rabbanon treat it as a carmelis despite the mechitzas. An area enclosed for non-residential purposes is generally referred to as a karfef. A common example would be a very large vegetable garden or even a big field. Okay, now, Shlomo HaMelech, the Gemara tells us, it was Masakin Iroven. The Gemara Shabbos. Aside from the Isurim against carrying in a mavoi or in a chotzer, come from it being open on one side, there's another Isur that results in the fact that compared to houses, chatzeris and mavais resemble rishus harabims. Houses are owned and used by individual families, whereas courtyards are owned and used by residents of all the houses that open into them. The Chacham were concerned that people might think of carrying from a house to a chotzer is like carrying from rishus harabim to rishus yochid. If you could do one, then you could do the other. They therefore assered carrying from a house into a chotzer unless something is done before Shabbos to symbolically join all the houses into the chotzer into one house. This procedure is known as Iruvei Chatzeris. It's the merging of the courtyards. And Iruvei Chatzeris is also required for carrying between two courtyards. Now, if you have a building, this is going to become interesting halacha question, halacha l'maisa. If you have a big apartment building, 40, 50, 60, 100 apartments, so it's the apartments that open into the building in order to carry. I believe there are poskim that hold that you need to have a Iruvei Chatzeris in order to carry in the building. Now, if the building is owned by one person and everybody rents the apartments, so then it's Rishus HaYachid. There's no need to make a Revich Hatzeres. Some are machmer to make a Revich Hatzeres without a bracha. But if it's not privately owned, then you would, Pashtus would require a Revich Hatzeres. They made a similar halacha for mavayis because courtyards, which serve only the house in them, seem more private than alleys, which are used by all the courtyards opening into them. Here too, they were mechayev, symbolically joining the courtyards of an alley into one courtyard, to be matter carrying from a chatzar into a mavoy on Shabbos. The procedure for doing this is known as shitufei mavayis. From Parak Vav through Parak Tes deal extensively with halachas of Ruvei Chetzeres shitufei mavayis. We will have more of an understanding of this to introduce these topics before Parak Vav. Okay, moving on to Tchumen and Eruvei Tchumen. The other big Isser Midrabanan that we're discussing here is the concept of Tchum Shabbos, commonly referred to as the Tchum, and the procedure for changing it, which is known as Eruvei Tchumen. It's rather big bachlekes if it's Deraisa Derabanan. On Shabbos and Yom Tovim, a person is also to go more than 2,000 amas from his halachically defined residence at the beginning of that day. This limit, this boundary, is called the Tchum, which means boundary. Although the Mishnah in Saita and Perek Hey brings a pasuk for this halacha, most Tanoim assume that it's only a din d'Rabbanan, not a din d'Oraisa. The Gemara brings Rabbi Kiva's shita in many places as being one who holds that the Tchum Shabbos of 2,000 amas is d'Oraisa. Many Tanoim argue with this in Saita and Daf Lamed, and it's clear from other places that the Rav of the Rabbanan hold that it's only a din d'Rabbanan. Now, there is a pasuk in the Torah that says that a person shouldn't leave his makam on Shabbos. Now, the 2,000 amas part, that might be d'Rabbanan. For more information, you can look in the Minchas Chinuch, which has a gevaldige arichas on the whole sugya of Tchumen. The halacha follows this view that it's only a din d'Rabbanan. To calculate the Tchum, we must first determine the person's place of residence at the beginning of Shabbos. This place is known as Mokim Shvisa, his Shabbos residence, the place where he's resting. In general, a person's Shabbos residence is a place where he actually spends Shabbos. If he began Shabbos in a town, the entire town counts as a Shabbos residence, and the Tchum is measured from the edge of town. If he began Shabbos in a solitary building, that's not a town. The entire building is considered his residence, his Mokim Shvisa, and the Tchum is measured from outside the walls of the town. If he began Shabbos camped in an open field, his Shabbos residence is in the Dalet Amos around him. According to some Shitas, this means a square of 4 amas by 4 amas, which according to others, it means 4 amas to each side of the person, and in fact, a square of 8 amas by 8 amas, or a circle of 8 amas by 8 amas, however you're going to understand it. I just saw an interesting story related to the concept of Tchumen, that there was a Reb Shneir Kotler was staying in some bungalow colony upstate New York, and a bacher walked from a certain camp and to greet Reb Shneir. He came for Shacharis, or he came for the Kiddush after Shacharis, and as the bacher is talking to Reb Shneir says, "Oh, you'll stay for the Kiddush? Yeah. You'll stay for the Suda? Yeah. The bacher stays for the Suda. He learns with him after the Suda. Reb Shneir invites the bacher to take a nap, gives him a bed, tells him to take a nap, stays for Shal Shudas, the bacher, stays for Avdallah. Then Reb Shneir says, wishes him well, tells him he could go. So those in the know said that Reb Shneir Chab, that this bacher Pashtus walked out of the Tchum, or didn't make a Erev Tchumen before Shabbos. Reb Shneir was chayshish for this. So he didn't want the bacher to walk back out of the Tchum, to walk back to his camp. So Shneir kept him there the whole Shabbos to save him from this problem. Okay. It's possible, however, for a person to establish a Shabbos residence as Mokim Shvisa in a place other than where he actually resides. This is done by making Erev Tchumen. The word Erev means a mixture or a merging together, is used to indicate the purpose of Eruvei Tchumen is to merge the boundaries, to merge the regular Tchum with the areas beyond it. Alternatively, this word means a legal remedy, a meaning bar from Eruvei Chetzeres, where its primary definition, merging, is applicable. As we state in Maggid Mishnah, Al Chas Yom Tov, Perek Vav Halacha Beis. This is done by making Erev Tchumen at a location of up to 2,000 amas away from his actual location. This halachically establishes his Mokum Shvisa at that place and enables him to proceed from his actual location to that point and 2,000 amas beyond that. Meaning it extends from where he made his Erev, it extended another 2,000 amas. In effect, it enables him to go a maximum of 4,000 amas from his actual place of Shvisa, since he may establish the Erev up to 2,000 amas from where he is. It does not give him more than the 2,000 amma limit. It merely shifts the point from where it's measured. For example, if one sets his Erev at a point 2,000 ammas away from where he will actually spend Shabbos, he will be able to travel 4,000 ammas in that direction. 2,000 ammas to the Erev and 2,000 ammas past that. But he'll be forbidden to go even 1 amma in the opposite direction, since that would put him more than 2,000 ammas away from his official Makom Shvisa, which is the Makom of his Eruv. And the Mishnayos are going to discuss where exactly to put the Eruv, what you use for the Eruv. So whatever he gains in one direction comes at the expense of the opposite direction. And there are cases that the Mishnah is going to discuss where a person might have to or might try to have access to both directions. An Erev Tchumen is made by placing before Shabbos a specified amount of food at the place where he wishes to make his Makom Shvisa. The person is then viewed as symbolically residing at the place where the Erev is. In addition, the Rabbanan regards a special ways for establishing a Makom Shvisa for people who find themselves stranded on the road just before Shabbos begins, as will be discussed in Perek Dalet. An Erev Tchumen may be made only for the purpose of a mitzvah. For example, to be Menachem Avel, to attend a Sudas mitzvah, or to greet a Rebbe, as the Shteit in Halacha, in Siman Shulchan Aruch, Siman Tov Tesvav. And the question is, we're going to be dealing with Tvachim and Amas and everything like that. So, a Tavach, we say, is around 4 to 6 inches. An Amma is anywhere between 1.5 feet and 2 feet. Many of the halachas discussed in this Masech that deal with units of measure and are expressed in terms of Amas and Tvachim and so on. A Tefach is basically a closed fist. The Gemara on Gimel Amud Beis concludes that an Amma consists of 6 Tvachim. So Machlek is Tanoim also. The Gemara in Menachos says that a Tefach is as wide as 4 thumbs of an average man side by side at their widest point, or 5 forefingers, or 6 little fingers side by side. Okay. Ad kan the Hakdama to Masech C'iruבין, and Mitzvah Shem will have a lot of siyata d'shmaya, gaining clarity and understanding what the Rishuyos are and what we could do with all these fascinating sugyas in halacha. Kol tov.